So we had our fast-track cohort who graduated from the university, and we had our next cohort who were doing the 4-year program, and of course the government decided it would not fund Year 4. We knew at the time that we agreed to establish the 4-year program, and the university knew that the 4th year wasn't being funded. But we were all very hopeful that it would take no time at all before the 4th year would be funded, that it was just a matter of process and putting it in the next budget or something like that. But for some reason the government was adamant that it wasn't going to fund 4th year. And so that was a very big focus for the profession and for the school, and then of course AUT or AIT had come in at that time and was also developing a degree program, and so we were all very focused on getting funding for our 4th year of the program and ensuring that our students had the rights and privileges of other students to have their 4th year funded. There were many other 4-year programs around. We also didn't have funding in a high category, so we were limited in terms of the funding that we had because of the category we were in. But we saw no reason at all why there shouldn't be funding for 4th year based on the justification of the need for a 4-year program for safety reasons as much as anything else, for the graduates needing that length of time to be educated. So the education group of the society that had been so involved in negotiations relating to the degree program at Otago was also then focused on getting the funding for the 4th year. The collaboration between the schools and the education group of the society was very strong at that time, and I guess I had also moved through in terms of my responsibilities with the society and was on the executive and then became the president in 1992. So I had to be careful in terms of the hat that I was wearing, whether I was being the president of the society or I was being the spokesperson for a committee or whatever, but we all had the same vision in mind, that we needed to have the funding, and so there was a very concerted effort with a lot of reviews and reports and submissions and meetings with ministers and all sorts of things, but it took a long time for that funding to come through, and eventually the university funded Professor O'Donnell, who had been Professor of Medicine at Otago and then had moved to be the Dean of the medical school in Wellington. He and I had some confidential discussions about the funding, and he had actually undertaken a study when he was in Britain and had been involved in going around a number of the schools of physiotherapy in Britain to look at whether they were funded as 3 or 4 year programs, and the consensus very strongly was that some of them were 3-year programs. If they could be a 4-year program, they would jump at it in Britain, and that was what they felt was appropriate. So some of that information, plus other submissions that were put forward, became the bones of his paper that finally was accepted by the ministry, and the 4th year was funded. But it took a lot of behind-the-scenes work and late-night discussions and secret discussions really to get it through for the university to be able to push the government enough to fund the program. And of course, once Otago was funded, then Auckland was funded as well. So there were 2 roles I really had in that era in terms of being in the school and also being the president of the society. So I could see very much that the students needed the funding, the school needed the funding, but I also needed to look after the wider interests of the profession. And the profession was growing in leaps and bounds at that time as well. But as far as the school was concerned, I became the clinical coordinator, I think, and then we were looking at the postgraduate programs and the opportunity for us to have a postgraduate diploma in manual therapy or manipulative therapy, and we had a member of staff called Mark Steptoe, who was a real enthusiast, a very individual character that many people probably have told lots of stories about, but he was an enthusiast. He'd undertaken a postgrad MINIPS course at Curtin University. We had a very strong rapport with his mentor and supervisor from Curtin, who would often come over and give courses at Otago, often funded through the trust or as a person who was coming to the conference. In fact, he came to the Dunedin conference and presented, and his pre-conference course was so successful that we filled the course numbers more than capacities, so we videoed the conference, and so we had video seminars for people, and that was quite novel in those days as well. But getting back onto the track of the postgrad course, Mark was unfortunately killed on his motorbike when he had the outline of the course programme stuffed down his jacket. He was driving off to deliver it to the orthopaedic surgeon, and he never made it. He was killed en route. And so that left a huge gap in the school in terms of who was going to take on the postgrad programme and how was the school going to manage in terms of its teaching, that Mark was very involved in the manual therapy teaching. And so around that time, give or take a few months, Robin Grosjean actually left her position as the head of the school and became the head of the postgraduate program within the university, which was solely within the university. So she had cut her links with the Polytechnic. And so I was made acting head of the School of Physiotherapy at the Polytechnic. So we were there still in the Polytechnic, still with our conjoint program, with Robin having gone to the university, not having Mark, trying to develop opportunities for students, and also being restless in terms of the inability for us to really push hard with our postgraduate programs. So over the next couple of years, because I think I was acting for about 18 months at least, there was a positive outcome in that the Polytechnic was going to advertise for a new head of school, and we made submissions very, very strongly to them and said, we do not want you to advertise that position, we want to be in the university. So we had to convince the university that we needed to go there. This was the ripe opportunity for us to go to the university because we didn't have a formal head of school. I was acting. We felt the need for the program. Once we'd established it, we could see that the students were successful. They were getting marks that were as good as the dental students in physiology, so there was no problem with the quality of our students, and it was the time for us to move. So I had quite a lot of involvement. Not that many people know about the meetings, but I really had a lot of involvement in meetings with the VC and others at the university to push the university to see that it was inappropriate for the Polytechnic to advertise for a head of school. It could have been that in those days the Polytechnic could have run a program and the university could have run a separate program, and that would have been silly as well. So I'm not saying that I had sole responsibility, of course I didn't, but I do know that I was involved in a number of discussions that helped the university to make its decision to take us on board. And of course, having decided to take us on board, they had to find somewhere for us to go. So we were in the midst of looking for other premises because we were moving at the end of 95 to the university. And so the thing that was on the cards that looked most positive was to go back to Hanover Street, where the old School of Physiotherapy was, and to put another story on the building. But of course the building was owned by what had now changed from the hospital board to the district or the area health board in those days. So it was going to cost quite a lot, and in the end that proposal fell through because the local hospital board was not prepared to give a long-term lease on the building to the university. So there was no way the university was going to spend millions of dollars in putting another story on if there wasn't a long-term lease agreement. So we were left coming to the university but without premises. So we had an arrangement that was an interim arrangement where we went to the Hercus building, which was the one where the animal labs are and the pathology department. So they found us some space in there, and we lived amongst boxes and all sorts of things for quite a period of time. And then part of the old recreation centre above the nurses' home was converted into some teaching labs, and it was reasonable. There was a nurses' gym up there, and there were various classrooms that got a paint and a tivvy up, and so we camped there whilst the university decided what it was going to do. And we were very fortunate in that because there was a bit of a crisis with where we were going to be housed for the longer term, it was such that various other programs for building, like the psychology department, got pushed aside and physiotherapy got pushed forward, and we ended up with the bow of the ship that we have now on Great King Street. We're built on the top of a morgue, but that's not really a problem. I think that the appropriate ceremonies were undertaken for spirits, etc., when we actually opened the building. So I don't think that anybody should feel that that's a difficulty, but it's a strong foundation because the morgue had bluestone in it right under the ground, and then it was with funeral parlour on the top. And so I think that we're on quite firm foundation here. But the building's rather like a ship that's about to sail forward, and we think it's got quite a good aspect to it. But some of us were very involved with the development of the building on the working party and making sure that our needs were met in terms of what would be a good requirement for the teaching facilities. There are no lecture theatres in the building because they're pooled lecture theatres, but certainly the labs and the teaching spaces really were designed very much with our needs in mind, and we had quite a few discussions about what needed to be there and what didn't need to be there, and I think most of what we wanted actually was approved and is what we've got today, and it's working very successfully. So that was the move from the Polytechnic through to the university.